I'm going to just start us off by asking each of the panelists, now that you've heard each of the presentations, we're just going to go through and get each of your reflections. So we're going to start with Kamilah to give us your reflections on what you've heard, and then we'll go through the other panelists.
Can everyone hear me okay? I just want to make sure because I switched mics. Okay, great. One of the things I had actually just commented on in the chat is that I love the different ways that we're engaging with Prince and analyzing him. I mean, see, Lee, you get in there with this spiritual component and this blackness and spirituality that just kind of undergirds the way you come at Prince and you take us to a revival. I got to get my sweat rag and get ready, but I love the way you contextualize him that way. Rhonda, you always bring this feminine sensitivity to your analysis of him that I think is so nice. And KaNisa just blew my mind. I said in the chat, like, I feel like I should get a badge or a certificate after that one because it was so unique and such a wonderful way to look at the truth and contextualizing Prince at that time and where we were in the digital world and where we are even today, the evolution from that. So I am just grateful to hear all these great minds bring these different perspectives and layers and nuances and nooks and crannies to really understanding Prince on a deeper level, which his work requires and deserves, doesn't always get in the mainstream.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kamilah. Liegh.
The same, just the diversity of voices. I love when I was looking at the collage for Professor Cummings, it reminded me, I tell people, go and read liner notes for Stevie Wonder's Songs in the Key of Life, because everyone that he lists, that's the Black Arts Movement, right? It is literally like so you have musicians, but then you have Nikki Giovanni, Sonia Sanchez, Amir Baraka. So again, as always, you are right on par of rooting Prince into the Black aesthetic. Sister Nicole, and Professor Cummings is right that Sister Nicole, what you did was, when I'm, as a poet and a short story writer, when I'm analyzing Prince, I'm doing it from that way. And because of my background training, I'm analyzing the power of craftsmanship devoid from the person's life, right? So I have only one regret in doing that, and you made me realize that regret is that probably, I just went blank. Not One of Your Tears. The song about his son. Why did I do it? You Come Back. That is the only regret I have, that I did not link that to that moment, right? I wanted to do, because my whole point of my book was I wanted to prove Prince as an intellectual artist. And so I know to do that, I needed to focus purely on his literary craftsmanship. But I will say that one failure is that in that one song, I think that song is owed more than that. And I'm glad that you and so many other people are doing that. And with Sister Williams, I agree with you, Professor Cummings. Not only did I feel like I needed a certificate after attending her workshop, but I love the fact that what she does is, in bringing an empirical discussion to art, we get to see its utilitarianism, right? How is art useful in our everyday life? And I think that those of us who are in the humanities can take a cue from Sister Williams' presentation, that this is how you show people that this is why the humanities is always important in everyday use.
Thank you so much, Liegh. Rhonda, your thoughts?
As always, my mind is blown. I'm always nervous going into these because, one, I feel like by the time we get to our presentations, we've already had so many great conversations and everything just starts piling in. You're like, wait, I didn't say that, or I don't want them to think I've copied it. But one of the things that stands out to me about this album is that it's one that I feel like in the Prince universe, we don't talk about as much. So I feel like we're kind of getting into new territory, all of us, with this particular conversation, because we're not exhaustively having conversations about the truth on Twitter and in other spaces where we find one another. So hearing these different perspectives of it was so outrageously mind-blowing. But also for me, just from the perspective of trying to put my presentation together, that era that we're talking about, the kind of 96-ish to 98-ish, is a blur because one, I was in college, so there was a whole lot of shit going on. The internet was newish. So the way that we were engaging with the music, very much to KaNisa's point, with the way that we were engaging with it was new because we were getting it through our computers and finding out about stuff without having to like read about it in a magazine or see it on the television. And I think that all of these different perspectives have renewed for me an interest in going back in time to this period, which really is a long time ago, but not that long ago, to reevaluate how the music came to be, how it came into our consciousness, and how we're interacting with it now. So everything that we have talked about today, from the initial roundtable to today's presentations, has really opened that up for me. And I'm really curious to just put myself in a place to go back and do some more study about this album, because I feel like there's so much more to talk about that we're just scratching the surface.
Thank you. KaNisa, your thoughts?
I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry. I was trying to get the volume to work.
Just going around and just having you all reflect on each other's presentations, since you were all focused on each of your own.
Yeah, it's. I mean, honestly, it was interesting. It's like, what do you talk about with this album? Because it is one of my favorites, and it was hard to come up with a topic. And then I was just doing a presentation at work about my Canvas stuff. I'm like, you know what? We're gonna adapt this. But I love how all of these flow together because, and I keep going back to C. Leigh's because I'm always very passionate about like depth psychology, of thinking of the shadow work of why am I impacted by the things that I consume, and realizing that most of my day when I'm reacting to something, it's a projection. It's something I haven't dealt with. It's something I might have dealt with and I want to promote and see reflected back at me, and how much people are not intentionally moving through the world and thinking through that. And even thinking through, we hear Prince say all the time that the first step at loving is loving yourself, because once you get that, all that other stuff doesn't bother you anymore, because you're like, that doesn't impact me. I recognize that as your experience, and this is my experience, and I respect that. So I really appreciate the way that you came at the album. I'm gonna like reread if possible, if you want to send that out to everybody, because it's just like, okay, wait, what, okay. And then Kamilah, I always love how you're like, okay, just a reminder, Prince is Black, and here are all the different ways that he showed us, and people forget. And I know we kind of echo chambered that within ourselves, that it's obvious, and I kind of wish that these had a bigger audience for people to understand that, because there's so much of who he was that's infused in his music that if you don't know what to look for, then it just goes over your head. And I appreciate how you always bring that back to be like, okay, wait, you see this? this is what's happening. Here's what you missed. And then Rhonda, I love how you kind of fit it back into the culture, like going back to actual songs. What is this song actually about? How does it fit into the timeline of what Prince was doing? What are the stories around each of these songs? Because it kind of brings it to like just the context of it, and kind of placing it, because we always want to hear the stories behind the music and what he was talking about at the time, and that's really important to understand. I remember being in English class, the first part of the unit when you're doing a novel is like, here's all the context, and you're like, oh, do we have to read about the Renaissance and what the culture and the yes, because that is important to place it in context. So I love how our panel kind of put all these different aspects together to really give it a 360 look.
What do you all think is, what do you think that it is about this album that lent itself to this kind of analysis? There was, I think among all of you, and even in the conversation we had before, there was a much more literalism in the way that people approach this album. A sort of directness of meaning. What is it about this album for you, and how you heard it and how you listened to it, that you think lends itself to that kind of approach?
We're
just going popcorn. So
okay, I was just going to say, for me, especially engaging with and exploring the album from the Black literary aesthetic context, is that it is just what when it's situated that way, it's the bluntness of it, it's the emotional honesty of it, that these characteristics of being socially emotive and thinking and situationally emotive rather, and what the times were then. And I was thinking about, yeah, the Ebonics debate was really going big then, and this is what Prince was going through at this time, and this is what, Black music was going in this kind of netherworld kind of space of what's really happening, and he's reacting to all of that, and it's really like a time capsule of when you really look at this one album. There's so many, just in the song that I did, Don't Play Me, but even the others, this real kind of time capsule of where we are as a society in ways that maybe 1999 was, or some of those earlier albums where we're really situating the conversation in the now being that particular time. And so as Rhonda and KaNisa had pointed out, going back and thinking about it now that way, like, okay, this is what was going on, and how each of you, even you guys earlier on the panel, were connecting to where you were in your lives at that time. What was your situation at that time? And then how did that impact your emotional response to the album then? And now I commented in the chat that for myself, after going through a decade of really devastating losses in my family, I find it difficult to listen to Come Back. Whereas when I first had the album, it was a song that wasn't my favorite. I was too up into One of Your Tears, but now Rhonda has given me an alternative consideration. And I'm like, dark, but I love to listen to it in the tub with my candles. So now I've got to think about it in a different way. So, but again, I think it's that thing. It's that bluntness. It's the situationally emotive aspect of it that just pulls us in to really engage with it in a way that's has some clarity and transparency that maybe some of the more ambiguous Prince works didn't have.
I think too, for some reason, thinking about Prince's catalog, he's always been open. He's always been vulnerable, but most of the time it was couched in some other stuff. So he's talking about something, but then it's like, but there's so much else happening, not just in terms of the lyrics, but the music. And here it's literally most of that is stripped away. So it's, for the most part, just his voice, just a guitar and some other instrumentation. And to Kamilah's point, very blunt, in your face lyricism. So it feels like this album is a lot more intimate, and it feels like it's very much more deliberately, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid off and let it all gush, and then I'm going to walk away from it. And I feel like maybe that's why it affects us in the way that it does, and why maybe we don't all talk about it the way that we talk about other albums, because there's something about it that makes us all have to be a little bit more raw and a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more willing to show the scars and to tap into that darkness and deal with the things that haven't necessarily always been beautiful in our lives. Whereas some of the other albums give us an easier out than this one does.
Yeah. And I would also add its delivery, right? It was packaged with 3 other things. It was not loud and boisterous in its arrival. So its delivery, you were kind of forced to kind of, like, generally the way capitalism works, they tell you that you're gonna like it and why you're gonna like it. Right, let's be clear. And even with Prince, right, he's back and he's black. He's always been black, but okay, since he's black, let me listen to the album for his blackness. And this was nothing, right? There was no, he's this, he's doing this. There was no, this is the most whatever. It seemed like every other album, Prince's most is whatever. And I think we were all, once we got it, forced to really just sit there with the work. And then, as Prof comments and Sister Nicole said, it's so stripped away that you are. It's almost, black hole is often something negative, but in this case, you just kind of like a magnetized to the lyrics in a way that it is probably the most, what I want to say, unpretentious presentation Prince has ever given us.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add except just saying the audience grew up. And so it's like we probably listen to the music differently than we did when we were 14, 15 years old. So when we hear Third Eye and we don't have experience with that, like, I want to say Google, let me pull out my encyclopedia and look up what does third eye mean, and how can I apply this to my life? Is it applicable? What is, I don't know, One of Your Tears, use condoms, I don't know, or that's a different song, but it's like, can I relate to this? is that a good thing to, pull out or send people? It's just like you have it an adult experience now. You can relate to it in a different level. And just looking back, maybe you're more interested in the type of things he's talking about. Again, we get more of that with the Rainbow Children later, but this is kind of when, and though he's always putting in things that you should go look up into his music, references to things, but this collection of songs is more intimate. He's in your ear saying all these things, and it kind of is a personal experience to be like, you know what? Let me reflect on this differently and bring my experience to it in a way that is different for me as an adult versus someone coming up and finding myself.
Yeah, I think, so what I'm hearing, and I think we heard this in the panel before, is if it were just one song, because there's always been like a song sometimes, or one or two songs, but as Rhonda said, it's usually couched in some other things, right? I think as a sort of protective shield that Prince builds around the more vulnerable statements. But this is almost like boom, 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 like one after the other, after the other, after the other. It is and in the spirit of an acoustic project, it is a stripping down. And so one of the questions we have from the audience, from Ali G, is, why do you think this is his only acoustic album? We know he had acoustic individual songs. We saw him tragically return to it in his farewell concert tour, but 35 plus albums and just this one. We know that he did this project collaboration with Andy Allo, Weekend Love, which was released on Tidal, right? Which was, I think Andy brought the sort of coffee house singer vibe to him, and they played upon that, and there was a delicateness to that project. But why do you think that this was not so plentiful in Prince's catalog?
I just think that he was just always moving, and even when he intended to circle back to stuff, he just didn't. It's again, he, by the time he circles back to it, of course, as you say, we get the piano and a microphone tour. So I don't think it was something that he wasn't, that he was avoiding so much, is that, Prince is just one of those artists that his pie chart has more slices than most people. And for those of us who love Prince, right, I know we've all gone through their phase. He should do just an all rock album. He should do just an all funk album. It's kind of like, once he does that thing, not so much that he's bored with it, but I've done that, so let's go do something. And so I just think that was it. It was just, again, it took him 20-something years to circle back to it. Unfortunately, by the time he circled back to it, he only had so much time left.
I have to plug my favorite album, the One Night Alone Piano and Voice. It's not acoustic, but it's similar. I mean, it's as acoustic as the truth is to me. So I think in a way he did kind of revisit it with just piano, but and it's just as intimate with the themes as well as the truth as well. So I would pull that one out, but I agree. Some of my favorite parts of Prince's concert when he does just a piano, or it's usually a review of older songs, or when he pulls out the guitar during musicology. But I don't know. Maybe he just likes to be more spontaneous with things like that, because those sets are never the same across concert. But I agree with I've done it. So what's next? Maybe he'll do a bass only album or something.
Oh, right.
Actually, real quick though, KaNisa, you just touched a nerve. I always wanted Prince to do a bass album. Okay, I'm out.
I love how D'Angela just be popping up in it. Rhonda or Kamilah, do you want to chime in on that?
I honestly had never really thought about it. I think that just kind of being caught up in, everything that he was doing all the time, I never paid attention to the fact that this was the only one. I know I referenced it in my presentation, but I don't think I even thought about it until I was working on this. Like, oh, that was pretty much all we got. I would wonder, so this isn't a definitive answer, but I would also wonder if the level of intimacy and vulnerability that we got through this album was something that he was not really trying to have to do again. Like maybe it was just like, in thinking about this entire era, it was a much more open era. You know, Prince is doing award shows and he's doing interviews and he's got his partner with him. And we never see him, you know, we know that he's got all these different lovers over the course of all these years, but we never see him with a particular person. And then all this stuff happens. And maybe that was just something that he didn't want to have to revisit in order to give us another acoustic album.
I was just going to say really quickly, I think it was Anil earlier who made that parallel of the One Night Alone, the piano on the mic, the real piano on the mic, not that estate release, but I'm sorry, but the One Night Alone with the piano on the mic, how that followed like the loss of his father, because I always loved that dedication of A Case of You to his father, you know, and then this one also, so this space of kind of going inward and exploring, and I don't know if he necessarily had instances later on in life that for the rest of the career that would have prompted that. I'm not sure, but then also as a fellow Gemini, when we've done it, we just keep on moving. So I just throw the air sign in there. So that might be it too, might be a zodiac thing.
You know, we know that many of his demos or the early sketches of songs were in acoustic, right? Like there's this famous circulating demo of Kiss that starts off as an acoustic song, a sort of sketch. And, you know, I was interested by the Prince's, you know, he's done this interesting thing in his career where he was comfortable with silence and like space, sonic silence as sound. But then there are these points where like he feels compelled to add things. And I just wondered why. What was the compulsion to add things to some of these tracks? I wonder what you thought about his use of silence in this album.
Well, I think it does provide the haunting quality. To kind of when you say about the add things, I do know for me, as both a poet and a short story writer, sometimes as an artist, you're being as authentic as possible, but also as an artist, there's this thing that you want to show that you have mastered all of the parts of the craft. So you keep putting things in the poem and keep putting things in the short story. They don't necessarily need to be there, but there's part of you go, hey, I want people to know I can do this. Right? I want people to know I got this Toni Morrison gene, and there's this layered upon layer. So I think that a lot of times when Prince was in the studio, one, he was a kid with, kid in the candy store. Right here, all these devices, all these toys. Plus, let's be clear, Prince wanted to be the funkiest MF of all time. And if I can put it in there to crush you into the ground, right? Because that's what he learned to be at the way from Sonny Thompson and all of them, to crush. So I think that just that, and so I think that to the point that you're making is that that's what makes the truth even more beautiful. That it was such a statement that he wanted to make, that his desire to put all the bells and whistles in there, right? A lot of times people say Prince is overproduced, right? He overproduced himself. That what makes the truth such a beautiful statement is that none of that is there. And it seems to have been no inkling of desire to produce it more than just the raw articulation of what he was giving us.
Absolutely. That is spot on. I was thinking about on the Originals album, his version of 100 miles per hour. And there's a lot of guitar happening. And I'm like, why is this here? Like, not that if anybody, not that I could tell Prince what to do, but if I'd had the opportunity to ever have a conversation with him, I certainly would have been like, why did you make that choice? Can we revisit it? But I think that with this album, even with some of the places where we have more stuff than we feel like we need, as we've kind of talked about today, it almost feels like it's I've got these things, so I'll put them here. And I would be very curious to hear a lot of these tracks from The Truth that have the extra production elements without them, to see what they sounded like, and maybe even understand why he made the decision to add some things here and take some things out elsewhere.
Yeah, we got to wrap up in about a minute, because I do think that doing a single instrument song does require a lot, right? You have to do a lot with that, that you might not be required to do if you have orchestration, if you have other parts. And so, yeah, I think, obviously I trust he probably heard the stripped down version of Animal Kingdom just didn't convey what he wanted it to convey. We needed the dolphins, and the cows mooing, and
Good Lord.
and I think, and some of the chat, people in the chat like UMB and others have talked about like other songs where Prince effectively used acoustic guitar, like Reflection. Of course, Sometimes It Snows in April. I think he mentioned So Blue. I would add When We're Dancing, Close and Slow. And I think someone said Shy. And so there are these places where that instrument shows up and Prince, uses it to great effect. So with that, I think we're actually past the time. But I want to really thank Celie, Rhonda, KaNisa, and Kamilah for another dynamic set of presentations. I had a lot of fun listening and responding and talking with you, and I look forward to the continued conversations that we will always have. And thanks to Brother Nelson. So with that, I think we're gonna bring D'Angela pops up.
I pop up, but we're gonna turn this around super quick. We're going to have our amazing keynote at the top of the hour, a little less than 20 minutes. So take a bio break, get ready, because we have a powerhouse of guests. You are in the place to be this Saturday night. So Krista, take us home. Hit that button.
Bye, y'all.
Au revoir.